in 65 kingdoms in India. You travel 100 kilometers in any direction. The cuisine changes, the attire changes, the dialect changes, the culture changes. This is how India is versatile in character, and we call it incredible India. So, around the land of Rajasthan called Rajputana, there were two important cultural traits which were very famous from those times. So, if you talk about those cultural traits, one was called Jauhar and the other one was called Sati. So, if you talk about Jauhar as a culture, then the perspective behind Jauhar as a culture was that death before dishonor. That was the philosophy behind Jauhar. Death before dishonor. Because when the Mughals came to India, they had a part of their culture as harems. So whenever they conquered any kingdom, they killed and plundered the males and they carried the females from that place to be kept in a place called harems where they were just for the pleasure making of the royals of the Mughals. But when they came to India around Rajputana, the Rajputana resisted that and a culture developed around this place called Jauhar. For example, the largest Jauhar in Indian history took place in the Chittorgarh fort where Rani Padmini led 16,000 women to the holy fire. And when she led 16,000 people to the holy fire, at that time, even the males performed a cultural trait, and that cultural trait was called Saka. For example, Padmavat's husband was Rana Ratan Singh, and Ratan Singh, when he was inside the fort, he had only 6,400 soldiers. And when Alauddin Khilji attacked, he had an army of around 89,000 people. So, when the women were getting ready for the Jauhar as a culture, the men were also preparing themselves for the Saka as a culture. So, they wore saffron turbans, then took the swords and everything, and went to the battlegrounds. And they knew that when they are fighting in a number of 6,400 people with an army of 89,000 soldiers, then you will surely meet the heavenly abode. So, they went to the ground with that opportunity that we will die with valor, a valorous death for the males. Women's, they did not fall in the hands of the Alauddin Khilji, so they jumped in the fire. So that was the largest Jauhar in Indian history, and the philosophy was death before dishonor. Now, when we segregate Jauhar from Sati, for example, you go to South India, you go to East India, you travel around India in different parts. In some upper classes of society, Sati was forced. But when you talk about Rajputana, it was always and always a volunteerism. For example, you talk about the great Mehrangarh fort. The last Sati which took place inside this fort was in the year 1843 when Maharaja Man Singh died. Maharaja Man Singh had 11 queens, and out of these 11 queens, only 5 performed Sati. So, there were two ways in which a queen couldn't perform Sati. One, if she was pregnant, she was not allowed to perform Sati. And secondly, if the fear of death was empowering her, then no one forced her to perform Sati. So these were the two grounds on which no one could force anyone to perform Sati. So out of the 11 queens of Maharaja Man Singh, only 5 performed Sati. So if you talk about a Sati as a cultural trait, for example, when Maharaja Man Singh died, you know inside the palatial part, there are 2 gates. One gate is called the Mardana Dodi, the other one is called the Janana Dodi. So Mardana Dodi was mainly used by the male members, Janana Dodi by the female members. But when Maharaja Man Singh died, on special occasions, the males were always carrying the corpse through the Janana Dodi gate and they were waiting outside the Janana courtyard. There is an extension table where they sprinkle Ganges water over it, mashed up with a cow dung, a white cloth, then sprinkling of mobilium dipped liquid over it. Then they kept the corpse over there and they waited around that place. Then there were trumpets playing. Now this was a message for the people to carry the corpse from that corpse table to the holy chalk or the main courtyard of the ladies. They kept the corpse at that place and they came out again. This was the time for the females to get the last glimpses and to give the holy cry. So all the women were around the corpse crying and weeping and everything. And then after around 45 minutes of mourning and everything, then again the trumpets were playing. Now this was a message for the people that we are converting the grievance ceremony of death into a religious ceremony. So when the second trumpets were played, the women who were to perform Sati were going inside the palatial bath. They were having a bath around that place. After bathing, they dressed like newly wedded brides with all precious ornaments around the body, with prayer wheels in their hands and holy Gita in their laps. The number of queens performing Sati, the number of palanquins inside the courtyard. So when the queens were inside the palanquins, the males were entering again. They were carrying the palanquins and the corpse of the king outside the female gate. No other females were allowed in the crematorium. As soon as they were getting out of the Janana Dodi gate, there were people dancing to prayers and hymns sung in the name of the deity of the dead person. As soon as the corpse of the king and the queens with the palanquins were joining, the procession is to start. At the first gate from inside, called the Iron Gate or the Loa Port, the procession is to stop. The queens, with wheels over their faces, were coming out of the palanquins, dipping their hands in mobilium dipped liquid and pasting it on the walls. This was a worship place for the coming generation as a respect for those ladies who were living for the heavenly abode. Then again, they were sitting inside the palanquins and the procession is to continue towards the Fateh Hall, the main gate of the Great Mehran, and they were moving towards the crematorium ground at Mandor. They were stopping at all royal temples where the queens were going inside the temple, paying homage to the deity inside the temple, and on returning back, they were donating the precious things to the poor and needy people around that place. Because we Indians believe in rebirth and we thought it's beneficial for us in the next birth. This way it was continued till the crematorium ground. In the crematorium ground, the wooden logs were laid, the corpse of the king was laid. If it was a single queen performing Sati, then the head of the king was taken in the laps by the queen. But if there were numerous queens performing Sati, then the wooden logs were laid, the corpse of the king was laid over it. Then the wooden platform was increased in width and length. Then there was sprinkling of Ganges water, again deploying of white cloth, then again sprinkling of mobilium dipped liquid. Then towards the head was the main queen, and then the other queens all around. We talk about the valorous soldiers and the courageous warriors, but you imagine those ladies sitting in live bonfire with a simple philosophy that we, for example, if I am performing something, we